From the outside, Ethan and Amelia Cole looked like a picture carved straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Their glass-walled home sat on a quiet hill in Queen Anne, overlooking the glittering skyline of Seattle and the silver shimmer of Puget Sound. Every morning, neighbors would see Ethan leaving in his tailored navy coat, coffee in one hand, briefcase in the other, his stride purposeful, his expression calm. Amelia, on the other hand, often stood by the window, her slender silhouette framed by soft morning light as she watered the white orchids on the sill. They were, by all appearances, the kind of couple people envied: successful, elegant, and effortlessly composed. Inside that home, silence had its own rhythm. The walls were adorned with photographs of vacations, framed magazine covers, and Ethan's architectural sketches, each one capturing a moment that had once meant something. But lately, even those images seemed to mock them. The laughter frozen in those photographs felt like someone else's life. Ethan's days were consumed by work. As a senior architect at a prestigious firm downtown, his projects defined skylines and earned awards. Yet the long hours and constant pressure had carved something out of him, something he didn't notice losing until it was gone. He told himself he worked hard for their future, for comfort, for security. But beneath that justification lay something quieter: fear. Fear of slowing down, of facing the emptiness waiting for him when the day was done. Amelia, meanwhile, had built her own success. As an editor for a well-known fashion magazine, she moved through a world of deadlines and digital perfection where appearances meant everything and emotions were best kept in check. Yet, when she returned home each evening, exchanging her heels for slippers, she felt the stillness like a heavy fog settling over her heart. Ethan was always at his desk, eyes on his computer, a faint glow illuminating his tired face. Their conversations had become mechanical, updates about bills, schedules, emails. The warmth had thinned between them, replaced by politeness, the kind that hurts more than anger. There was a time when they couldn't keep their hands off each other. When they used to dance barefoot in the kitchen to old jazz records, when dinner conversations stretched late into the night and their laughter filled every corner of that same house. But those moments had slipped away quietly, replaced by habits, routines, and the dull ache of familiarity. Sometimes, Amelia would scroll through old photos on her phone, trips to Napa, the weekend in Portland, the day Ethan proposed in the rain near Pike Place Market. She remembered how he had looked at her then, how certain his eyes had been. That gaze was gone now, replaced by something distant. She wondered when exactly it had faded, or if she had simply stopped looking for it. One Thursday evening, the rain was tapping softly against the window while Ethan sat at the dining table, reviewing blueprints. The light from his laptop painted his face a pale blue. Amelia stood nearby, sipping a glass of white wine, wearing a soft sweater that fell loosely around her shoulders. She wanted to say something, anything to break the silence. "How was your day?" she asked finally, her voice tentative. He didn't look up. "Busy. We're trying to finalize the design for the waterfront project." She nodded, though he wasn't looking at her. "That's good. You've been working on that one for months." "Yeah," he murmured, distracted. "It needs to be perfect." She hesitated. "Ethan, do you ever get tired of it? Of all this?" He looked up then, brows furrowing slightly. "Of what?" "Of pretending that everything's fine," she said quietly. "We barely talk anymore. You come home, you work, and Amelia," he interrupted softly but firmly, "I'm doing this for us, for you. You know that." Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked at him for a long moment before turning away. The reflection in the glass window showed two people standing in the same room, but living in different worlds. Later that night, after Ethan went to bed, Amelia sat alone in the living room. The rain had turned heavier, and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. She picked up one of Ethan's sketches, a design of a modern building, lines sharp and flawless. There was something poetic about it, how much control he had over every detail on paper, and how little over the crumbling foundation of their marriage. Upstairs, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He could hear faint music from the living room, a jazz record she used to love. It used to make him smile. Now it only reminded him of what they'd lost. He thought about going downstairs, about wrapping his arms around her the way he used to, but something held him back. Pride, exhaustion, maybe fear. He turned on his side instead, convincing himself he would try tomorrow. But he wouldn't. The following weekend, they attended a dinner party hosted by one of Ethan's colleagues. To everyone else, they looked radiant her in a navy dress that shimmered under the lights, him in a crisp black suit. They smiled. They held hands when people looked. They laughed at the right moments. But when they returned home, silence followed them through the door like an unwelcome guest. That night, Amelia sat at her vanity, removing her earrings slowly. Her reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, polished but hollow. She could hear Ethan brushing his teeth in the bathroom, humming faintly, as if everything were normal. She felt an ache rise in her chest, the kind that comes before tears but never quite reaches them. In bed, they lay side by side, bodies inches apart. Outside, the city pulsed with life sirens in the distance, wind against the trees, the faint hum of a world that kept moving. But inside their house, time seemed to stand still. Ethan's breathing soon deepened into sleep. Amelia stared at the ceiling, the weight of her loneliness pressing down on her until she couldn't bear it anymore. She turned her head, whispering into the darkness a question he would never hear. "Do you even see me anymore?" The rain answered for him, soft and relentless against the glass. And in that quiet moment, under the roof of their perfect home, something inside her began to break silently, invisibly, like a fracture no one would notice until it was far too late. The night it happened, Seattle was wrapped in fog. The streets below their hillside home glowed faintly under the amber hue of streetlights, and rain tapped gently on the glass walls of their living room. Ethan had stayed up late again, working on revisions for a new client who wanted everything by Monday morning. His desk was littered with sketches and coffee cups, and his back ached from sitting too long. Amelia had gone to bed hours earlier after saying a quiet goodnight he barely heard. By midnight, the house had fallen completely silent, except for the muted hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Ethan's laptop froze as he was exporting a file, and out of frustration, he decided to restart it. When it came back on, his eyes caught the notification on the corner of the screen, his and Amelia's shared email account. It wasn't unusual. They both used it for bills, travel confirmations, subscriptions. He clicked it absent-mindedly. Then he saw a draft folder with a single, unsent message. He might not have noticed it at all if not for the subject line. "I need to tell you the truth." Curiosity flickered first, then something colder. He clicked. The message opened slowly, the cursor blinking at the end of a few hundred words, and as he began to read, the world he thought he knew started to crumble, one sentence at a time. "I don't know why I'm writing this, or if I'll ever send it. Maybe I just need to see the words somewhere outside my head. The truth is, I still think about you every day, every night. It shouldn't have happened. You were kind when I needed kindness, and I let it go too far. I betrayed Ethan, and I hate myself for it. But I can't lie anymore. What we shared wasn't meaningless, even if it was wrong." Ethan froze, his breath catching somewhere between disbelief and nausea. His eyes traced the words again, hoping he had misunderstood them, that this was a letter meant for him, or perhaps a fictional piece Amelia was editing. But then he saw the name at the top. To Michael. He scrolled, his hands trembling. You made me feel seen again. I wish I could erase it all, but I can't. Sometimes when I'm home, I hear him typing in the next room, and I feel like a stranger in my own house. I know I'm the one who created this distance, but part of me still wishes you'd said you loved me before I walked away. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the blood draining from his face. The words blurred before his eyes. He closed the laptop, but then opened it again, as if the screen itself might offer a different version of the truth. It didn't. The email sat there, unsent, but alive, every line a quiet betrayal. He felt the air around him grow heavy, his pulse pounding in his ears. For a long time, he didn't move. He just stared at the screen, feeling his chest tighten until it hurt to breathe. Finally, he stood, pushing his chair back too fast. The legs scraped sharply against the hardwood floor, breaking the stillness. Upstairs, Amelia stirred faintly but didn't wake. Ethan walked to the window and stared out at the fogged glass, his reflection faint and ghost-like. His mind kept circling the same questions. When? Who was Michael? How long? But deeper than those was the ache of something more devastating. Why? He walked upstairs on autopilot, his hand gripping the railing tightly. Their bedroom door was half open, and inside Amelia slept curled on her side, her hair falling softly across the pillow. Her face looked peaceful, untouched by the storm that had just begun inside him. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring. He wanted to wake her, to demand answers, to shake her until she spoke the truth out loud. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he stepped closer, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, remembering the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who once promised him honesty above all else. A single tear welled up and fell down his cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it away roughly, ashamed of it. He left the room and went downstairs again, pacing in the dim light of the kitchen. The email kept replaying in his head, every word echoing like a knife scraping against glass. He poured himself a drink whiskey, straight, and swallowed it fast, though it did nothing to steady him. Around 2 a.m, Amelia woke to the faint sound of glass clinking. She found him standing by the counter, barefoot, still in his work shirt, his eyes red-rimmed. "Ethan?" Her voice was groggy. "Why are you still up?" He didn't answer. She frowned, stepping closer. "Did something happen?" When he finally looked at her, his gaze was hollow, distant like a man staring through her instead of at her. "Who's Michael?" he asked quietly. The name hit her like a slap. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Ethan's voice broke, quieter but sharper now. "I read it. The email you never sent." Amelia's breath caught, and she took a step back, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh, God, don't," he said, the words shaking with restrained fury. "Just don't." She tried to speak, to explain, but the air between them had turned to ice. "Ethan, please, How long?" His voice cracked, raw. "How long were you lying to me?" "It wasn't," she began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't say it wasn't what it looks like. Don't you dare insult me with that." Tears welled in her eyes. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "It meant nothing." He laughed, then a short, bitter sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You wrote that it meant something. You said he made you feel seen. So which is it, Amelia? Meaningless or unforgettable?" She covered her face, sobbing quietly. "I was lonely, Ethan. You were never home. I didn't know how to reach you anymore." "So you reached for someone else?" he said, his voice low, trembling with anger and heartbreak. The room felt too small, the air too thin. The rain outside had turned violent, slamming against the windows as if echoing his pulse. Amelia reached out, desperate to touch him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "Don't," he whispered again. "Just don't touch me." He turned away, grabbed his coat from the chair, and walked out into the night, leaving the door open behind him. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. Amelia stood there, frozen, listening to his footsteps fade down the driveway until there was nothing left but the sound of the storm. Upstairs, on the glowing screen of the laptop, the unsent email still waited a confession never meant to be seen, yet powerful enough to destroy everything it touched. And somewhere in the fog, Ethan kept walking, numb and wordless, the night swallowing him whole. The rain hadn't stopped since that night. It fell in sheets over Seattle, gray and endless, painting the city in melancholy. Ethan hadn't come home for 2 days. He slept in a downtown hotel, though sleep wasn't the right word for the hours he spent staring at the ceiling, feeling the slow unraveling of everything he'd believed in. The world around him kept moving horns on the street, murmurs of people in the lobby, but inside him, everything had gone still. By the third morning, exhaustion drove him back home. Not forgiveness, not even curiosity, just the need to face what had broken. When he pulled into the driveway, the house looked different, smaller somehow, as if it too had been wounded. The windows reflected the dull light of dawn, and through them, he could see Amelia sitting on the couch, her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. When he stepped inside, the smell of stale coffee and rainwater filled the air. Amelia looked up immediately, eyes swollen from crying, hair loosely tied as if she'd given up trying to appear composed. For a moment, neither spoke. Ethan closed the door behind him, the sound echoing through the silent house. He stood there, dripping rain onto the hardwood floor, his coat heavy, his jaw tight. "Ethan," she said softly, almost afraid to break the quiet. He didn't answer. His gaze swept over her, cold, unreadable. "You should have deleted it," he said finally. His voice was low, deliberate. "If you were going to lie, at least be thorough." Her lips trembled. "I didn't mean for you to see it." "That's the problem, isn't it?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You didn't mean for me to see anything. Not your loneliness, not your guilt, not your affair." Amelia stood, clutching the mug as if it could steady her. "Please, don't say it like that." "How should I say it?" His voice rose, sharp now. "What do you want me to call it? A moment of weakness? A misunderstanding? You slept with him, Amelia." The words hung in the air like shards of glass. She flinched, setting the mug down with shaking hands. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "Then tell me what it was." She looked up at him, eyes brimming with tears, her breathing uneven. "I was lonely," she said finally. "You were never here. You were always working, always somewhere else. I tried to talk to you, Ethan, but you... Don't you dare blame this on me," he snapped, stepping closer. "Don't twist this into something I made you do." Her voice cracked. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just trying to explain." He stared at her, his face pale, expression unreadable. "Explain? You think there's an explanation that makes this better?" Amelia sank back onto the couch, her hands covering her face. Her shoulders shook as she tried to speak through the sobs. "It wasn't supposed to happen. Michael, he was someone I used to work with. He listened. That's all it was at first. I just needed someone to talk to." "And then what?" Ethan asked bitterly. "One night you decided talking wasn't enough?" She looked at him then, eyes raw with shame. "It happened once," she whispered. "Only once. And afterward, I hated myself. I ended it immediately. It didn't mean anything."
Ethan laughed again, not the kind of laughter born from humor, but disbelief. You keep saying that, Amelia, that it meant nothing. But you wrote to him. You said he made you feel seen. She looked down, tears spilling freely now. Because he did. For a moment, I felt like someone noticed I was still alive. You stopped looking at me years ago. He stepped back as if her words had struck him. You think that justifies it? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. Nothing justifies it. I was wrong, I know that. But Ethan, her voice broke. You have to believe me. I never stopped loving you. I just lost myself. He stared at her for a long time, his hands clenched at his sides. Every word she said twisted deeper into the wound. He wanted to hate her, and part of him did, but underneath the rage was something more dangerous. Sorrow. The kind that made breathing difficult. Do you even know what you've done? He said quietly. You've destroyed everything. All of it. Every memory we had. Every promise we made. Amelia stood, tears streaking down her cheeks. It doesn't have to be the end. It already is. Ethan, please, she begged, stepping closer.
I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll go to therapy. He shook his head, his voice low and breaking. You can't fix something that's already dead. For a moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the windows and the faint hum of the heater. Amelia reached out, her hand trembling. Don't leave me, she whispered. Not like this. Ethan looked at her, really looked, and for a brief second, he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with. The laughter, the warmth, the spark that had once filled their days, and maybe that was what made it unbearable. I don't even know who you are anymore, he said softly, and I'm starting to think I don't know who I am either. He turned and walked toward the door. Amelia moved to follow him, her bare feet silent against the floor. Ethan! Her voice broke in panic. Please don't go! He stopped in the doorway, rain still pouring outside, the cold wind slipping past him into the house. He didn't turn around. I can't stay here, he said quietly. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. She rushed forward, grabbing his arm. Ethan, please, don't leave me like this. I'm begging you. He pulled free gently, almost tenderly, and looked back at her one last time. Her eyes were wide, red, desperate. I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But you killed that love with a secret you couldn't even face yourself. Then he stepped out into the rain. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, and Amelia sank to the floor, the sound of her sobs swallowed by the storm outside. Ethan walked down the street without knowing where he was going. The rain soaked through his clothes, cold and relentless, but he didn't care. He felt hollow, as if the world had been emptied of color and sound. Every step echoed with the weight of what had been lost, not just his wife, but the version of himself that had believed in forever. Behind him, in the house that still smelled like coffee and tears, Amelia sat alone, trembling, her heart breaking in a rhythm that matched the rain. She whispered his name once, twice, but the storm carried it away. And for the first time in their marriage, they were both truly alone, two people bound by love, undone by silence, and shattered by the truth that could no longer be unsaid. 3 weeks had passed since the night Ethan walked out. The days bled into one another, gray, formless, heavy with rain. He had rented a small apartment downtown, overlooking the same skyline he once admired from their home. But now the view seemed cold and unfamiliar. His life had shrunk to the essentials: work, silence, and the dull ache of existence. He woke early, worked late, and spoke little. His colleagues noticed the change, though no one dared to ask. The light in his eyes had dimmed. The easy charm that once filled a room was gone. even his architecture. His refuge felt meaningless now. The clean lines and perfect symmetry of his blueprints only reminded him of the chaos he couldn't design his way out of. He hadn't heard from Amelia since that night. Her messages went unread, her calls unanswered. Sometimes, late at night, he'd unlock his phone, hover over her number, and stare at it until the screen went dark again. There was anger, yes, but beneath it, something deeper, an exhaustion of the soul. Love and betrayal had fused into something unrecognizable. That Thursday morning, the sky was low and gray, the kind of Seattle morning where the air itself felt wet. Ethan was reviewing a model when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, from a hospital. He hesitated before answering. "Mr. Cole?" a woman's voice said, calm but strained. "This is Harborview Medical Center. Your wife, Amelia Cole. She's been in an accident." For a moment, Ethan didn't process the words. They echoed faintly, disconnected from meaning. What did you say?" he asked, his voice trembling. "She was in a car accident early this morning on I-5. She's in critical condition. You're listed as her emergency contact." Critical condition. The phrase hit like a punch to the chest. "I'm on my way," he said, before he even realized he was speaking. He didn't remember the drive, only flashes of wet asphalt, the reflection of headlights through the fog, the rhythmic sweep of the wipers. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Every red light felt unbearable. His mind kept circling back to their last conversation, to the look on her face when he'd said he didn't know who she was anymore. That was the last thing she'd heard from him. When he arrived at the hospital, the air inside smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked clothing. The lobby was bright but cold, filled with muted voices and the hum of machines. At the reception desk, he gave her name, his own, his voice barely steady. The nurse nodded gently, her expression softening when she saw his face. "She's in surgery right now. You can wait in the family area." He nodded, but his body moved as if underwater. The family area was a sterile room with gray chairs and vending machines. A muted television flickered silently in the corner. He sat down, elbows on his knees staring at the floor tiles. Around him, other people waited, some pacing, some crying softly, all suspended in the same unbearable uncertainty. Ethan felt a strange detachment, as if he didn't belong there, as if he had no right to sit among them. He had left her. He had vowed not to come back. And yet, here he was, heart pounding, hands shaking, praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Hours passed like that, slow, heavy, each minute stretching longer than the last. At one point, a doctor entered and spoke to another family. Their tears and gasps filled the room. Ethan watched silently, his chest tightening with dread. Finally, a nurse approached him. "Mr. Cole?" He stood so quickly his chair tipped. "Yes." "She's out of surgery. She's stable for now, but still unconscious. You can see her, but only for a few minutes." He followed the nurse down a long hallway that smelled of bleach and metal. Machines beeped faintly behind closed doors. When she opened the door to Amelia's room, the world seemed to narrow to a single sound, the steady rhythm of her heart monitor. She lay pale and still against the white sheets, her face bruised, a small bandage over her temple, a tube resting at the corner of her mouth. Her hair was tangled, her skin almost translucent under the fluorescent light. Ethan froze in the doorway. His throat constricted. For a moment, he couldn't move. He felt 1,000 memories crash over him. The laughter that once filled their home, the scent of her perfume in the mornings, the way she used to whisper his name when she thought he was asleep. And beneath all of it, the sharp, unbearable echo of that last fight. He stepped closer, every movement hesitant, reverent. The machines around her pulsed and breathed in her place. He sat beside her, staring at the rise and fall of her chest, unsure if he even had the right to be there. "Amelia," he whispered. Her name felt strange in his mouth, fragile. He wanted to say so many things, that he hated her for breaking him, that he missed her, that he didn't know how to stop loving her no matter how hard he tried. But the words tangled in his throat, lost between guilt and grief. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers. For a long moment, he hesitated. Then he touched her fingers, cold, motionless, but still hers. Tears filled his eyes before he even realized he was crying. He pressed his forehead to her hand, his voice breaking into the sterile air. "Why, Amelia? Why did you do this to us?" There was no answer, only the quiet beeping of the monitor, indifferent to his pain. He stayed there for what felt like hours. Nurses came and went, checking the IV, adjusting the monitors, but no one asked him to leave. When evening came, the rain outside had turned to a soft drizzle. The city lights flickered through the blinds, painting her face in faint gold. He finally stood, his legs stiff. The doctor returned, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "She made it through the surgery," she said softly. "That's a good sign. But the next 24 hours are crucial. Head trauma, internal bleeding. We'll know more by morning." Ethan nodded numbly. "Can she hear me?" "Maybe. It's hard to say. Sometimes patients in a coma can sense a familiar voice. Talk to her. It can help." He nodded again, unable to speak. When she left, he sat back down. The weight of everything he'd refused to feel came crashing in. Then the anger, the regret, the love still buried beneath the wreckage. He realized, with a kind of horror, that losing her was still his greatest fear, even after everything she'd done. He leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't get to leave me like this," he said. "Not after all of it. You don't get to end our story here." His voice broke again, and he bowed his head. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the city, and the rain began once more. As he sat there, her hand in his, he felt the faintest movement so slight he thought he imagined it. Her fingers, cold and weak, seemed to twitch against his palm. Ethan's breath caught. He looked up quickly, but her eyes remained closed, her breathing steady. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe, somewhere deep inside that still body, she had heard him. And for the first time in weeks, Ethan didn't think about leaving. He just sat there, listening to the rhythm of her heart, praying that this time she would find her way back to him. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of machines and the soft, intermittent beeping of monitors. The air was heavy with the smell of antiseptic and something faintly metallic, like rain on cold steel. Outside, the gray sky pressed against the windows, turning the world into a muted watercolor of light and shadow. Amelia lay motionless on the bed, her body wrapped in wires and tubes that seemed to hold her fragile life together. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, her lips slightly parted as she breathed through the tube that ran from her mouth to the ventilator. A faint bruise bloomed across her cheekbone, a cruel mark against the face Ethan once knew so well. He sat in the chair beside her, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together as if prayer might somehow undo the wreckage between them. His eyes, hollow from sleepless nights, moved from her face to the steady green lines on the monitor, to the IV dripping into her arm. He tried to remember when he had last seen her truly at peace, unguarded, alive. Her sister Claire stood near the door, arms folded, her eyes red-rimmed. "She's been asking about you," she said softly. "Even before the accident, she kept saying she wished she could talk to you, that she'd gone too far." Ethan didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on Amelia's hand, resting limp on the white sheet.
Wishing doesn't erase what she did, he murmured, the words flat and brittle. Claire hesitated, then came closer. She made a mistake, Ethan. A terrible one, yes, but she never stopped loving you. You know that. He gave a faint, humorless laugh. Love? Is that what this is? You don't send emails to other men when you're in love with your husband. The words hung in the air like shards of glass. Claire's eyes filled again, but she said nothing. She turned and left quietly, leaving Ethan alone with the steady rhythm of machines and the storm inside his chest. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long, shaky breath. His reflection in the darkened window startled him. He looked older, worn down, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and regret. He had imagined this moment 100 times since leaving her, seeing her again, perhaps strong enough to face him, to apologize, to fight for what they had lost. But this fragile, broken version of her was something he wasn't prepared for. At some point, Amelia's mother entered, her movements slow and trembling. She looked smaller than he remembered, her grief heavy on her shoulders. She always spoke about you, she whispered, touching Amelia's foot through the blanket. She said she'd ruined everything, but she wanted to fix it. She was on her way to see you that morning. Ethan's head snapped up. What do you mean? She was going to your office. She said she couldn't stand the silence anymore. Her voice cracked. She wanted to tell you she was sorry. The words hit him like a physical blow. He felt the breath leave his lungs, a hollow ache expanding in his chest. He turned his face away, unable to look at Amelia's still form. The idea that she had been trying to find him, that she had been driving toward reconciliation when her car spun out on that wet road, unraveled something inside him. When her mother left, Ethan remained there, lost in the blur of his thoughts. Outside, the rain began again, tapping softly against the window. He imagined Amelia's car on the slick highway, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her heart racing, her mind full of words she'd never get to say. He rose slowly from the chair and stood beside the bed. The machines blinked and hummed quietly. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. It felt strange, the intimacy of the gesture. There had been a time when touching her was second nature, effortless. Now, even this felt like trespassing. You said you were lonely, he whispered, his voice trembling. But I was there, Amelia. Maybe not in the way you wanted, but I was there. I built a life for us. I gave everything I knew how to give. His voice cracked. And it wasn't enough, was it? He waited, as if she might stir, open her eyes, answer him. But she lay still, her breathing shallow and mechanical. The door opened quietly, and a nurse entered to check the monitors. She smiled faintly, sympathetic but professional. She's holding on, she said softly. Sometimes, when patients are surrounded by love, they find strength to wake up. Ethan gave a small nod, though he wasn't sure what love meant anymore. Still, when the nurse left, he moved closer, sitting so that his face was level with hers. Do you hear that, Amelia? He said quietly. They think you're surrounded by love. But all I can feel right now is confusion and anger and... He stopped, the word heavy on his tongue, and fear. He exhaled slowly. You're not supposed to be here like this. You're supposed to be arguing with me about dinner, or calling me stubborn, or making fun of how I can't stand your music. Not lying here, half gone. His throat tightened as he spoke, his words trembling into silence. He took her hand, noticing how light it felt in his own. Do you remember the first time we came to Seattle? He asked quietly. You said the rain made everything beautiful, even the sadness. You said it washed away what people tried to hide. He gave a soft, bitter laugh. Maybe that's what's happening now. Maybe the rain's washing everything away until there's nothing left but the truth. He stared at her for a long time, his thumb brushing her knuckles. In the faint light, she looked almost peaceful, untouched by the chaos she had left behind. As night fell, her room dimmed, lit only by the soft glow of the monitors. Claire returned briefly, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "She needs you to forgive her," she whispered, "even if she never wakes up." After she left again, the words echoed in his mind. Forgiveness. It sounded simple, but it wasn't. Forgiveness wasn't just a word, it was a dismantling of pride, a surrender of pain. And he didn't know if he had it in him. Hours passed. The world outside the window blurred into darkness. Ethan sat there, motionless, his thoughts looping endlessly between love and betrayal, grief and longing. Somewhere in the middle of the night, he whispered again, "If you can hear me, Amelia. If you're somewhere inside this silence, just come back. We'll figure the rest out later." He didn't expect a response, but as the words left him, a faint tremor ran through her fingers. His breath caught, his eyes wide. The machines continued their steady rhythm, unchanged, but something in the air shifted, a subtle current of hope. He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm still here," he said. "Even when I shouldn't be, I'm still here." And for the first time since the night he walked away, Ethan realized he no longer knew where his hatred ended and his love began. All he knew was that he couldn't let her go. The days at the hospital began to blur into one another, each one marked by the same sterile rhythm: the morning rounds, the soft murmur of nurses, the hum of fluorescent lights, the beeping that never stopped. Ethan no longer noticed the outside world. The city, with its constant drizzle and the muffled sound of traffic, felt distant, as though life beyond the hospital window belonged to someone else. He started bringing his laptop to Amelia's room, sitting beside her motionless form while he worked, or pretended to. But most of the time, his eyes drifted toward her. The sight of her chest rising and falling in slow mechanical breaths both reassured and haunted him. He had memorized the sound of the ventilator, the slight hiss before each exhale, the faint tremor in her fingers that the doctor said was nothing more than reflex. One afternoon, Claire returned with a small box. It was worn and slightly bent, its corners softened from years of being opened and closed. She placed it on the table beside Amelia's bed. "These were in her apartment," she said quietly. "Old journals, letters, recordings. Maybe you should read them." Ethan stared at the box for a long time after she left, his stomach tightening with unease. He had spent weeks resenting the things Amelia had said and done, building walls of bitterness to survive the wreckage she'd left behind. But the thought of her words, her voice waiting inside that box, made his chest ache. That evening, when the nurses dimmed the lights and the corridor outside fell silent, he opened it. The faint smell of paper and perfume rose from within, a scent that transported him back to their old home, the one with ivy creeping along the window panes and her laughter echoing down the hallway. The first thing he found was a journal, its pages filled with her looping handwriting. At first, he hesitated to read, but then he saw a date, October 12th, 2022, the day before their anniversary. He came home late again, said the project was running behind. I tried to tell him about my day, about the new campaign at work, but he nodded without really listening. I miss the way he used to look at me. Sometimes I think if I disappeared, he wouldn't even notice until the laundry piled up. Ethan's hand trembled as he turned the page. The words blurred slightly as tears pricked his eyes, but he kept reading. It's not that I don't love him. God, I do. It's just that I feel invisible, like I'm living beside someone who's already half gone. The house is full of his silence. It's heavy. It follows me everywhere. He closed the journal, pressing his palm against the cover,
feeling an ache bloom deep in his chest. He had told himself so many times that Amelia had betrayed him out of selfishness, weakness, vanity. But here, in her own words, was a loneliness that mirrored his own, only he had been too blind, too proud, to see it. He pulled out another item, a folded letter, never sent, addressed to him. Ethan, I don't know how to reach you anymore. We live together, but it feels like you've built a wall between us, and I'm standing on the other side, knocking until my hands bleed. You don't yell. You don't fight. You just disappear into your work. I started to think maybe if someone else saw me, if someone else listened, it would hurt less. But it doesn't. It just makes me hate myself. The words struck him like a confession wrapped in agony. He let the paper fall to his lap and covered his face with both hands. The air in the room felt suffocating, heavy with truth. For a long while, he didn't move. He stared at Amelia's still form, at the faint pulse fluttering in her neck. She looked peaceful, untouched by the storm she had left behind, and yet everything about her screamed fragility like a glass figure that might shatter at the lightest touch. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why did we both stay silent for so long?" The next day, he listened to one of her old voice messages saved on an old phone. Her voice, warm and uncertain, filled the room. "Hey, it's me. You probably won't listen to this, but I'm sorry. I wish we could go back to before things got so complicated, before we both forgot how to talk. I know I hurt you, Ethan, but you hurt me too in ways you'll never understand. I just want you to know that underneath it all, I never stopped loving you." He replayed it 3 times. Each repetition carved a little deeper into his defenses. By the end, his anger had begun to dissolve, not in forgiveness, not yet, but in understanding. That night, he took her hand again. It felt warmer than before. He found himself tracing the faint lines across her knuckles, remembering how her hands once moved when she spoke, animated, graceful, alive. "You were right," he said softly. "I was there, but not really. I was building a future, but not a home. I thought giving you everything meant never stopping to see you. I thought that love was something that just existed on its own, like architecture once built. It stands forever. But I was wrong." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the back of her hand. "We built something beautiful, and then we forgot to live in it." Outside, the city lights shimmered through the rain streaked glass, blurred and distant. He could hear the faint sound of a saxophone from somewhere on the street below, playing a tune that seemed to echo his thoughts, melancholy, slow, filled with longing. He opened the journal again, flipping to another page, one written after their last argument. "I wish I could undo everything. I wish he could see how small I feel, how desperate I am for him to just look at me, not with disappointment or anger, but with love. I don't want another man. I want my husband back. I just don't know how to find him anymore." Ethan shut his eyes. The pain that had once burned like fire now felt like ash heavy, dull, inescapable. His anger, which had been his armor, began to crumble beneath the weight of what he'd lost. He stayed like that for hours, reading, listening, remembering. The memories came uninvited. Their first Christmas in Seattle, when they couldn't afford a tree, so they decorated a potted fern with paper stars. The night they danced barefoot in the kitchen after a storm. The laughter, the warmth, the way her eyes had once been enough to calm him. Now all that remained was silence and the faint hum of machines keeping her tethered to the world. By morning, Ethan's eyes were red, but his expression had changed. The bitterness was still there, but it was quieter, tempered by something gentler, something closer to sorrow than rage. He reached out once more, brushing her hair from her forehead. "You wanted to be seen," he said quietly. I see you now, Amelia. I see everything. And for the first time since her betrayal, he didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal or the need to punish. He only felt the aching emptiness of what they had lost, an emptiness that was, at last, shared. The morning Amelia opened her eyes, the world inside the hospital room seemed to change in a single breath. The light that had always filtered through the blinds, a dull gray wash over sterile walls, now carried a strange warmth, as if the city outside had paused to watch this quiet moment unfold. Ethan was dozing in the chair beside her, a worn journal still resting open on his lap, his head tilted toward her bed. For days, the nurses had told him there were subtle movements, faint twitches in her fingers, the flutter of her eyelids, but he had stopped believing in miracles. He had seen too much stillness, too much silence. Yet now, when her lips parted and the faintest sound escaped her throat, it was as if the air itself trembled. Her first attempt at speech was broken, the sound caught between breath and pain. Ethan stirred, his body tense, unsure if what he'd heard was real. Then it came again, a soft, hoarse whisper that barely carried across the space. Ethan! His eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then, as if in slow motion, he turned toward her. Her eyes were open, weak, unfocused, but alive. He froze, the world narrowing until all he could see were those eyes, once so vibrant, now clouded with exhaustion and something deeper remorse. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. His breath caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. Amelia, he said, his voice barely a whisper. She blinked, the effort seeming to drain her. Her lips moved again, forming his name as tears welled at the corners of her eyes. You're here, she whispered. You stayed. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to say something that could match the flood of emotion pressing against his ribs, but the words wouldn't come. He nodded instead, his throat dry. The monitors beside her pulsed steadily. Outside, the faint drizzle against the glass created a rhythm that filled the silence between them. She tried to lift her hand, but the tubes restrained her, and he stepped forward instinctively, taking her fingers gently in his. Her skin was cool, fragile, but real. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I thought you'd never come back, she whispered, each word punctuated by effort. I thought I'd lost you forever. He swallowed hard. You almost did. Amelia closed her eyes briefly, as if the weight of his words pressed too heavily on her. When she opened them again, there was no defense, no pretense, only a raw honesty that cut deeper than any confession. I'm sorry, she breathed. I'm sorry for what I did, for hurting you, for breaking what we built. I didn't know how to live with the emptiness. Her voice trembled, and her tears soaked into the pillow beneath her. It wasn't about him, she said, her words fractured but desperate. It was never about him. It was about me feeling like I'd vanished, like I didn't matter to anyone anymore. I wanted to feel alive again. I wanted you to see me, but I see now. All I did was destroy everything. Ethan stood still, her words echoing in the hollow space between them. He looked down at her, the woman he had once loved so completely that her laughter could change the weight of his day. And now, all he saw was the fragile outline of someone both broken and human. I read your journals, he said quietly. Your letters. I know how lonely you were. Amelia's breath hitched. Then you know, I never stopped loving you. The silence that followed was unbearable. Ethan felt the old ache rising again, the memories of betrayal, the night he'd left, the way anger had become easier than grief. He wanted to believe her, wanted to erase everything that had torn them apart, but the words, "I love you" stayed locked behind the years of pain. She searched his face, her voice cracking. "Say something, please." He looked away to the window where the rain was tracing uneven lines down the glass. "I don't know what to say." Amelia's breathing grew uneven, her strength fading with each word. "Do you still hate me?" He closed his eyes. "I don't know." "But you came," she whispered. "You stayed. That has to mean something." He turned back to her, his jaw tightening. "It means I couldn't walk away from you, even after everything. I tried. God knows I tried, but every time I did, something pulled me back." Her lips curved faintly, a ghost of the smile he once knew. "Because you still loved me," she murmured. Ethan looked at her, then really looked. The woman before him wasn't the same Amelia who had betrayed him. That version of her, proud and restless, had been stripped away. What remained was someone softer, shattered, repentant. And in that moment, he realized love wasn't gone. It had only changed shape, muted by grief, reshaped by time. He wanted to tell her that. He wanted to tell her that despite everything, she was still the person he thought of when the city lights blurred at night, still the echo in every quiet room. But when he opened his mouth, the words refused to form. He faltered, his voice rough. "I don't know if I can say what you need to hear." Amelia nodded weakly, tears glistening. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to. Just being here, it's enough." He shook his head slowly. "It's not enough. You deserve more than silence." She smiled faintly, her eyelids drooping. "No, Ethan, I just deserve the truth." The truth, he thought bitterly, was that love could survive betrayal, but it never came back the same. It became quieter, cautious, like a wounded thing learning how to breathe again. He sat down beside her, still holding her hand, watching as her eyes began to close. "You should rest," he said softly. Her voice was barely audible now. "Will you be here when I wake up again?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Amelia smiled, a faint trace of peace settling across her features. "Then I can sleep." He watched her breathing slow, each inhale fragile but steady. His thumb brushed across her knuckles in slow, absent circles. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him longed to whisper those words to bridge the distance that still lived between them. But as he sat there, staring at the woman who had broken his heart and now unknowingly held it again, he realized he was terrified. Terrified of loving her, of losing her, of forgiving her too late. The rain outside softened into a mist. The city lights flickered through the fog like stars trying to find their way home. Ethan leaned forward, his lips close to her ear, his voice barely more than breath. "I can't forget," he whispered, his voice trembling. "But I'm trying." Her fingers twitched in his hand, a small response, as though even in sleep she understood. He sat back, eyes fixed on her face, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the sharp edge of anger, only the quiet ache of something that might one day become forgiveness. Outside, dawn began to break, pale and uncertain. Inside, Ethan stayed by her side, his silence no longer cruel, but full of everything he still couldn't say. The morning Amelia died began like any other in the hospital, gray, quiet, heavy with the soft machinery of life being held together. Ethan had barely slept the night before. He'd stayed by her bedside, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the rhythm that had become the only sound keeping his world from collapsing completely. The doctors had said she was stable, that she was slowly gaining strength. For the first time in weeks, he'd allowed himself to believe in a future fragile, uncertain, but possible. When he left her room at dawn to grab a coffee, the corridors were nearly empty. The rain had stopped, and the city beyond the hospital windows glistened under a pale, washed-out light. He sat in the cafeteria, staring at the untouched cup before him. The past few days had shifted something inside him. The sharpness of his anger had softened into sorrow. He could no longer look at Amelia and see only betrayal. He saw a woman who had broken beneath the weight of his absence and who, even in her weakness, had loved him to the very end. He had planned to tell her that morning. He'd rehearsed the words quietly, turning them over like stones in his mouth. "I forgive you." But when he tried to imagine saying them, they caught in his throat. Forgiveness felt too big, too heavy, too sacred to give lightly. And yet, he wanted her to hear it. Not because she needed redemption, but because he needed release. When he returned to her room, the hallway was crowded, nurses moving quickly, a doctor speaking urgently into his headset. For a moment, Ethan didn't understand. The world seemed to slow, sound stretching into silence as he saw the door to her room open, a flurry of motion inside. Machines beeping wildly. A nurse pressing on Amelia's chest. Another calling for epinephrine. "Sir, you need to step back," someone said, but he couldn't move. He stood frozen, his heart pounding as he watched from the doorway. Her body, once so still, now convulsed under the rhythm of compressions. The line on the monitor flickered, screamed, then steadied, then flatlined again. "Amelia!" His voice broke through the chaos, hoarse and desperate. "Please, please, she was fine." A nurse turned, her expression full of sympathy, her eyes already wet. "We're trying, sir. Please step back." But he didn't. He couldn't. He pressed himself against the wall, gripping the edge of the doorframe so tightly his knuckles went white. Everything blurred: the beeps, the commands, the crash of the defibrillator pads against her chest. For a second, her body jerked. Then nothing. And in that stillness, Ethan knew. Before the doctor said anything, before the nurse lowered her head, before the machines quieted one by one, he knew. The world emptied out. He didn't remember falling to his knees, didn't remember the sound that tore from his throat, something raw and animal, the sound of a man watching his last chance slip away. Someone tried to help him up, but he pushed them away. His gaze locked on her, the woman who had once filled every corner of his life, now reduced to silence. Hours later, he sat alone in the hospital chapel. It was small and dimly lit, a few flickering candles lining the altar. The scent of wax and old wood hung in the air. He clasped his hands together, but not to pray. He wasn't sure he believed in God anymore. If God existed, he had been cruelly quiet these past few months. He thought of all the things he hadn't said, the words he'd kept buried beneath pride and hurt. "I forgive you. I still love you. I'm sorry too." Simple words, but he had waited too long. Now, they had nowhere to go. The funeral came 3 days later. Seattle was gray and cold, the sky heavy with unfallen rain. The cemetery overlooked the bay, where the water reflected the low-hanging clouds like dull silver. People stood in small clusters beneath umbrellas: family, friends, colleagues. Ethan stood apart, his coat dark and damp, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He barely heard the priest's words. They sounded distant, muffled, as though spoken through glass. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The sound of soil hitting the coffin made him flinch. Claire approached him afterward, her eyes red, her voice trembling. "She loved you, Ethan. Even at the end, she said your name before—" Her voice broke. "Before they lost her." He nodded, but didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was tight, and every word felt impossible. Claire touched his arm gently, then walked away, leaving him standing alone as the crowd began to disperse. The rain started again, light at first, then steady. He didn't move. He stayed long after everyone else had gone, watching the earth grow darker where the water touched it. The grave looked too small, too final, to contain the enormity of what he felt. Finally, he crouched down, his hand brushing against the wet soil. His voice was quiet, roughened by exhaustion. "I was going to tell you," he said, "this morning. I was going to tell you that I forgave you." The words came out uneven, broken. "But you didn't wait, did you? You always moved too fast, always rushing towards something I couldn't see." He laughed bitterly, wiping the rain from his face though it mixed easily with tears. "And I was always too slow." He closed his eyes. The memories came in fragments, the sound of her laughter in their kitchen, the smell of her perfume on his shirts, the way she used to rest her head on his shoulder when they watched the rain. All the tiny things that made up a life. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you completely," he admitted softly. "But I know this, whatever I was holding on to, whatever anger I thought kept me safe, it's gone. And all that's left is missing you." He placed his hand flat against the ground, as if trying to bridge the distance between the living and the lost. "Forgiveness isn't for you anymore," he whispered. "It's for me. It's the only way I know how to let you rest." The rain fell harder, the sound steady and cleansing. Around him the cemetery blurred into gray, the world softening at the edges. He stayed there until the cold seeped through his coat and the sky began to darken. As he finally rose to leave, a gust of wind moved through the trees, scattering a handful of petals from the nearby flowers. They spiraled through the air, landing gently across the fresh soil. He looked up at the clouds, their edges tinged faintly with light. "Goodbye, Amelia," he said quietly. "Wherever you are, I hope you're free." He turned and began walking down the narrow path, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes. The rain washed over him, cold but oddly clean, as if the sky itself was offering the absolution he had been too late to give. Behind him, the wind whispered through the leaves, carrying his final words into the gray Seattle air. "I forgive you." And for the first time since she had broken him, Ethan felt something loosen inside his chest, a small, fragile peace, born not from forgetting,